Why do we lock the doors? Daddy Marcus Wells heard his daughter's voice echo in his mind as he stood at the apartment door, one hand on the cold brass knob. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, and the rain outside was relentless, the kind of downpour that made the entire street look like it was drowning. Through the peephole he could see her, a woman soaked through, shaking, barely standing upright. She had knocked twice already, and both times he had hesitated. Inside the apartment behind him, Lily was asleep on their threadbare couch, wrapped in a blanket, with holes starting to form in the corners. The place was small studio apartment, small. The kind of small that meant Marcus and his daughter lived on top of each other, where there was no real separation between his world and hers. The walls were a sad shade of beige he had painted 3 years ago when his wife left, and he had needed to do something with his hands that didn't involve falling apart. The furniture was mismatched, a collection of thrift store finds and hand-me-downs. A children's book sat open on the floor, where Lily had left it, mid-story, something about a dinosaur looking for his mother. His laptop sat on the kitchen table, closed, where he had been checking his work schedule for tomorrow. Marcus was 32 years old. He worked at Portland Warehouse Solutions, supervising a team of 12 people who moved freight and handled inventory. The job was steady. The pay was adequate, but not generous, and it required him to be at work at 4 a.m. most days, which meant going to bed early and waking before dawn to the sound of his alarm. He had learned not to dream anymore. Dreams required sleep, and sleep was a luxury he didn't quite have. The woman on his porch knocked again, softer this time, like she was running out of energy. Marcus's hand tightened on the doorknob. His first thought was about Sarah, his ex-wife. Sarah, who had walked out on a Wednesday 3 years ago. Sarah, who had taken money from his account, not the joint account that had been depleted by medical bills and rent, but the small savings account he had been building, secretly dollar by dollar, for Lily's future. She had taken $3,000. He had discovered it when he tried to book Lily's dental appointment, and his card was declined. The password on his email had been changed. She had been thorough. His second thought was about his sister Natalie. 5 years ago, she had called him crying, saying she needed to borrow money to cover her rent and her car payment. She promised to pay him back in 2 months. He had sent her $3,000 from his savings. That was 5 years ago. He had heard from her exactly 3 times, since a text message saying, "Thank you," a Christmas card, with a generic message, and a phone call on his birthday, where she said she was sorry, but she couldn't pay him back yet. He hadn't heard from her in 16 months. His third thought was about his boss, Mr. Kendall, who had called him into his office last Friday and said, "One more mistake, Marcus, and you're out. I've got 50 guys who want your job." The mistake had been a misplaced shipment. Not even Marcus's fault. It had been filed wrong by someone else. But the words had landed like a punch. Marcus had learned to think about trust the way some people think about money, as a finite resource. Once it was spent, it was gone. And he had spent his trust on people who had left him, or hurt him, or broken their promises. The woman on his porch was a stranger. She could be anyone. She could be dangerous. She could be running from something or someone. She could hurt him, or steal from him, or lie to him. The safe choice was the obvious one. Close the door lock. He'd go back to bed and forget this ever happened. But then he heard her voice, thin and barely audible through the heavy apartment door. I'm sorry to bother you. Is there anywhere warm? Just for a few hours?" Marcus opened the door. It was not a noble gesture. It was not heroic. It was simply a man looking at a drowning woman and realizing that the cost of safety was loneliness, and the cost of loneliness was becoming someone he didn't want to be. He stepped aside. She was taller than he had expected, or maybe she just looked taller because of how thin she was. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes down her back. She wore an expensive-looking coat that was now ruined, and underneath it was the kind of dress that cost more than Marcus made In a week he could tell by the way it hung, by the subtle perfection of the seams. But she was shaking so hard, her teeth were chattering, and her eyes had that unfocused quality that comes when someone has been running on fear and adrenaline for so long that the body finally starts to shut down. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke on the second word. "Come in before you catch pneumonia," Marcus said, which was the kind of thing people said in situations like this, even though nobody actually caught pneumonia from rain anymore. It was something his mother used to say. She stepped inside, leaving a trail of water on the linoleum floor of his apartment. Marcus closed the door behind her and felt something shift in his chest, a small, quiet lurch that felt like he had just made a decision that would change something. He didn't know what or how, but he could feel it. "Bathroom is there," he said, pointing down the short hallway. "Towels in the cabinet." She nodded but didn't move right away. She was dripping, creating a small puddle on his floor, and she seemed to be waiting for permission, or waiting to wake up and discover this wasn't real. Marcus found a hoodie he never wore, and a pair of sweatpants that had gotten too small before he had gained weight, then too large after he had lost it. He brought them to her, and she took them, the way someone takes something they don't believe they deserve, with both hands careful, like it might break. "Thank you," she said again. "For this. For everything." "It's just clothes," Marcus said, which was not true, and both of them knew it. While she showered, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea he didn't drink. The water ran in the background, and he tried not to think about what he was doing. He tried not to think about the statistics he had heard about letting strangers into your home. He tried not to think about Lily sleeping in the next room. He tried not to think about anything except the small, stubborn voice inside him that had made him open the door. When the woman came out of the bathroom, she was wrapped in his sweatpants and his hoodie, her dark hair wet and combed straight. Without the dirt and the exhaustion etched into her skin, she looked younger. Or maybe she just looked human in a way she hadn't before, like someone who had been running so hard for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stop. "The couch is comfortable," Marcus said, which was a lie. It was a couch from a thrift store that sagged in the middle and smelled faintly of someone else's life. "You can sleep as long as you need." She lay down slowly, testing the cushions, like she was unsure whether they would hold her. Then she pulled the plaid blanket up to her shoulders and turned her face toward the back of the couch. "Daniel," she said quietly. Marcus was halfway to his bedroom. He stopped. "It's Marcus. Marcus," she said, like she was memorizing the name. "Why did you let me in?" He didn't have a good answer. He could have said something about basic human decency, about not being the kind of person who turned away someone in need. But those would have been lies, or at least partial lies. What he actually said was, "I don't know." And then he went to his bedroom, where Lily was still asleep, curled around her stuffed rabbit, like it was the only real thing in the world. Marcus did not sleep that night. He had told himself he would after Lily was down and the woman was settled on the couch. He had told himself he would go to bed and lock his bedroom door and let tomorrow worry about itself. But at 11:47 p.m., he found himself sitting in the kitchen chair he had pulled to the edge of the living room, watching shadows move across the woman's face from the streetlight outside. She was asleep, finally, completely the way people only sleep when they have surrendered to something larger than themselves. Her breathing was shallow at first, and then deeper. Sometimes she made small sounds, not quite words, not quite anything recognizable. Her hand would move across her stomach, like she was checking something, or protecting something, and then it would fall still again. In the darkness, Marcus watched her, the way a parent watches a child, alert to any change, any sound, any sign of distress. His mind did not rest. He thought about Sarah, the way he always thought about her, when he was afraid, not as a person, but as a series of betrayals. The wedding day when he had believed she meant it, when she said forever. The day Lily was born, when he had thought his family was complete. The Wednesday when she walked out and took his trust with her. He thought about how she had looked at other men when they were still together, the way her eyes would slide past him, in rooms like he had already become invisible to her before she physically left. He thought about how she had taken the money, and how she had probably justified it to herself somehow, the way people always do. He thought about how he had wanted to hate her, but couldn't quite manage it, because she had given him Lily, and Lily was the only reason he kept showing up to work. The only reason he didn't just let everything fall apart. He thought about his sister Natalie, the way he thought about a wound that never quite healed. She was 8 years older than him, and when they were kids, she had been his hero. She had protected him from bullies, and taught him how to ride a bike, and made him feel like someone important loved him. When she asked him for the money, he had said yes immediately, because he still saw her as that older sister, even though she was 47 years old, and he hadn't seen her in person in 7 years. He had sent the money, and she had thanked him, and then she had vanished slowly, like someone was turning down her brightness over time, until she was barely visible in his life. The worst part was that he couldn't even be angry at her, because he understood. He understood that people made promises they couldn't keep, and that shame made people do strange things like disappear from the people who had loved them. He thought about trust the way a person thinks about something they had lost, as a resource that once spent was simply gone. Sarah had spent most of it. Natalie had spent the rest. He had been living on fumes for 3 years, and now this woman, this stranger, was sleeping on his couch, and he had no more trust to give. He had exhausted his capacity for believing in people, and yet he had opened the door. Around midnight, the fear really set in. What if she was a liar? What if she was running from someone dangerous? What if she was running from the law? What if she had a knife in her purse? What if she woke up in the night and hurt him while he slept? What if she hurt Lily? His hands clenched. He had to consciously unclench them, pressing his palms flat against his thighs, feeling his heartbeat slow marginally. She was sleeping. She was not a threat. She was just a person sleeping on his couch, and he was a person sitting in a kitchen chair at midnight falling apart, because he had done something kind and didn't know how to live with the consequences. Around 1:30 a.m., his mind shifted to logistics. He didn't have much worth stealing. The TV was 15 years old. His laptop was the cheapest model Best Buy sold. The furniture was thrift store furniture. But Lily had a tablet, a birthday present from last year. And if that went missing, Lily would cry, and he would never forgive himself. She would ask him why he had let someone in, and he would have to explain that sometimes you make decisions based on something other than logic, and he would have no good way to defend that. He thought about calling the police and telling them there was a woman at his apartment. He thought about what would happen. They would come, and she would be taken away, and he would feel guilty for the rest of his life. He thought about the news stories he had read about homeless people arrested for trespassing. He thought about how much worse her situation was about to get if he called the police. He did not call the police. Around 2:15 a.m., the woman's breathing changed. She became very still. Marcus found himself leaning forward, checking to make sure she was still alive, which was ridiculous. She was asleep. She was fine. She was just a person sleeping on his couch, and he was losing his mind because he had made a choice to be kind, and now he had to live with the consequences of that choice. But at some point in the night, he didn't know when, maybe around 3:30 a.m., when the rain had finally stopped and the city outside had gone quiet. In that way, cities go quiet in the deep night when most people are asleep and the world feels like it's holding its breath. Something shifted. The tension he had been holding in his chest loosened just slightly. Not completely. Not enough to make him feel safe, but enough to make him feel less like he was going to have a heart attack. Sophie slept the way Lily slept when she had finally let go of a nightmare completely, totally, with the kind of surrender that only comes when you trust that nothing bad will happen in the next 8 hours. Her face had softened. The lines around her eyes had eased. Her shoulders, which had been hunched up around her ears, had dropped. She looked for the first time since she had shown up on his porch like she was not carrying the whole world on her shoulders. Marcus understood something then, though he couldn't have quite articulated it. He understood that sometimes people don't need a solution. They don't need advice or money or legal help or a place to stay forever. They just need to know that someone won't turn them away when they are asking for help. They just need to know that they are not completely invisible. They just need warmth and shelter, and the knowledge that someone thought their life was worth protecting for one night. He had done that. He had let her in, and whatever happened next, whether she robbed him or hurt him or lied to him or turned out to be exactly who she appeared to be, he had done that. He had chosen mercy, and that was something. Around 5 a.m., Marcus went back to bed. He didn't sleep. He just lay in the darkness next to Lily, listening to her breathe, and thought about the woman on his couch. He thought about how fragile everything was, how easily a life could unravel, how quickly a person could go from having a home and a job and an identity to having nothing. When morning came, it came quietly. The rain had stopped. Pale gray light filtered through the thin curtains of his apartment. Marcus woke to find that he had actually slept sometime between dawn and 7 in the morning. His body had finally given up and let him rest. He opened his eyes to the sound of movement in the living room. For a moment he was disoriented. Where was he? Why was his neck screaming in pain? Then he remembered the woman, the rain, the couch. He got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Lily, and padded barefoot down the hallway. She was awake, sitting on the edge of the couch with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the bookshelf where Marcus kept his and Lily's books. A mix of Dr. Seuss and survival guides, children's dreams, and adult nightmares sharing the same shelf. She was dressed in his sweatpants and his hoodie, and in the pale morning light coming through the window, she looked like a person who had finally stopped fighting and surrendered to whatever was coming next. She didn't look dangerous. She looked like someone who had been running for a very long time and had finally stopped. "Hey, Marcus," said his voice rough from sleep. "You should sleep more." I slept enough," she said. She didn't turn to look at him. "More than I have in months, probably." Marcus sat down in the kitchen chair, a different kitchen chair, not the one he had kept vigil in all night. His neck popped. He was 32 years old, and already his body was betraying him. "Can I make you something to eat?" For the first time, she turned to look at him. Her eyes were different, still tired, still guarded, but something had come back into them overnight. Something like hope, maybe. Or just the ability to think about the future as a thing that might actually exist. "Do you have a phone I could use?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. His phone was ancient and unreliable, sitting on the kitchen counter where he had left it. But the question surprised him, because it was the first thing she had asked for since arriving, and because he understood, without being told, that this wasn't a casual request. This was important. This was the moment where whatever story she was in the middle of would continue, and he was about to decide whether to help her move forward or not. "Of course," he said. She took it from him without thanking him, which was when he knew this was serious. She just walked into the kitchen, turned away from the living room, and dialed a number so quickly, it was clear she had done this many times, her fingers moving on the keypad with muscle memory. Marcus stayed in the living room chair, telling himself not to listen. It was her private business. It had nothing to do with him. But of course he listened. He couldn't help it. "It's me," she said into the phone. Her voice was different now, sharper, more sure. Something in her had changed, or maybe something had come back. "I need you to call Victor. Tell him I'm alive. Tell him I'm not running. Tell him we need to talk about what happened at the board meeting." Marcus's mind did a calculation. Board meeting. Victor. The way she was speaking suggested she was used to having authority, or had been anyway. There was a pause. Then she said, "No, I'm not coming back tonight. I need 48 hours. Just tell him that. Tell him I have something he needs." Another pause. Marcus caught the tail end of a voice on the other side. Male, urgent, concerned. I'm safe, she said. That's all you need to know. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a moment without moving. Then she handed the phone back to Marcus with a nod of thanks, a small gesture, but one that seemed to cost her something. I need to be honest with you, she said, about who I am, what I've done. It's not good and it's complicated, but you deserve to know before this goes further. Marcus's stomach did a flip. This was it. This was the moment where the whole thing fell apart, where he realized he had made a terrible mistake by letting her in. This was where she told him she was in real trouble. Not petty trouble. Corporate. Legal. Dangerous, maybe. Okay, he said, though it wasn't okay, and it wouldn't be. Tell me. They sat on the couch together and she told him her story. Her name was Sophie Chen. She was the former CEO of Meridian Capital, a Boston-based investment firm with assets in the billions. She had held the position for 6 years. It had been her identity. Everything. 3 months ago, she had discovered something. The CFO, a man named Harrison Blake, had been routing company money through offshore accounts. Fraud, embezzlement, millions of dollars. She had confronted him directly because that's what she thought you did when you discovered crime. You reported it. You believed the system would protect you. You believed that doing the right thing would be rewarded. Instead, Harrison had something on her. Compromising photographs. Fabricated evidence of financial impropriety on her part. Blackmail material. When she went to the board, he showed them the evidence. The board believed him, or they didn't believe him, but didn't care. Either way, they voted to ask for her resignation. It took 4 hours. One day she had been the CEO. The next day she had been escorted out by security and told not to come back. She had gone home to her apartment and sat on the edge of her bed and realized that everyone who was supposed to help her had either abandoned her or was in on the coup. Her lawyers wouldn't return her calls. Her friends stopped texting. She had transferred what money she could to an account they didn't know about, but it wasn't much. Enough for a week in a hotel, maybe 2. And then the paranoia had set in. What if the CFO had the power to freeze her accounts? What if he had people looking for her? What if she couldn't trust anyone? She had walked out of her apartment at 9 p.m. with nothing but her phone and her purse. She had no plan. She just knew she needed to disappear for a while and think. And she had walked in the rain until her feet hurt, and she had found herself in Portland, and she had walked past his building, and she had seen his light on. I didn't know why she said. I still don't, actually. I had walked past your building before, I think. Or maybe I was just lost. But when I saw the light on, I asked. She paused, and for a moment, the CEO persona cracked, and the exhausted woman from his porch emerged. You didn't turn me away, she said, and I needed someone to not turn me away. Lily wandered out in her dinosaur pajamas while they were still talking. She saw Sophie and asked, Are you still here? Like it was the most natural thing in the world for there to be a stranger on their couch. Sophie said, I am. Is that okay? Lily said. Yeah, you seem nice. Daddy was worried last night, but he does that a lot. Marcus felt his face heat up, but Sophie almost smiled. 3 days passed. Sophie stayed on the couch. Marcus brought her extra pillows. He showed her how to use the shower. He bought groceries and made simple meals. Lily did her homework while Sophie watched, and Sophie ended up helping her with a math problem, explaining fractions using pizza. It was a strange, quiet, domestic scene that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. On Friday afternoon, Marcus came home from work to find a man standing outside the apartment building. Sharp suit, expensive watch. He looked completely out of place in this neighborhood. Marcus's heart stopped. This was it. This was Harrison, or someone working for Harrison, coming to collect Sophie. But Sophie was not afraid. She was waiting for this. She asked the man, Is he ready? The man nodded. He wants to meet. Tonight, 7 o'clock. After the man left, Sophie told Marcus the truth. She had made a call 3 days ago. Not the call Marcus had heard, but a different one through a friend who still answered her calls. She had told Harrison she was coming back. She had told him she had proof of everything he did. She had told him she was willing to negotiate. "I have proof?" Marcus asked. "I have the backup of the offshore account ledgers," Sophie said. "I took them the day I found the fraud. I didn't know I'd need them, but I kept them. Harrison doesn't know I have them." "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked. "I want to take back what's mine," Sophie said. "My reputation, my company, my life. But I need help. I need someone who understands how servers work, someone who can help me verify the ledgers are real." Marcus hesitated. "Sophie, I'm not a hacker. I'm a warehouse supervisor." I know," Sophie said. "But you're careful. You think about consequences. You don't rush into things. I've watched you with Lily. You consider every decision. I need that right now." Lily, hearing them from her room, came out and said, "You should help her, Daddy. She's nice." So Marcus said yes. That evening they drove to a downtown hotel. Marcus was nervous. Sophie was calm. In the lobby they waited for Harrison Blake to arrive. When he did, he walked in like he owned the place. Expensive suit. Confidence that came from always winning. Sophie said, "I have the offshore ledgers. All of them. Every transaction, every routing number, every wire transfer. I have the authorization codes. I have it all." She slid the USB drive across the table. Harrison's face changed, just slightly, but Marcus saw it. Harrison said, "That's not admissible in court. You obtained those fraudulently." Sophie said, "You're right, so I'm not going to court. Yet. First, I'm going to the board. I'm going to show them everything, and I'm going to give them a choice: support my reinstatement and announce your arrest, or I take this to the SEC, the IRS, and the FBI." Harrison realized he had lost control of the narrative. Sophie said, "I don't want money. I want my job back. I want you to resign and confess. I want the board to release a statement supporting me. In return, I will minimize the public damage. No FBI, no SEC investigation if possible. Just a quiet resignation and a settlement." Harrison said. "And if I refuse?" Sophie said. "Then I destroy you." She meant it. A week later, the board held an emergency meeting. Sophie presented the evidence. The board was shocked. They realized they had made a mistake. They offered her job back. They offered an apology. They offered a settlement. Sophie accepted the job offer. She declined most of the settlement. She said, "Use it for an organization that helps corporate whistleblowers." The legal side moved quickly after that. Harrison Blake was arrested by the FBI. The charges: wire fraud, embezzlement, extortion, blackmail. He faced 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Sophie didn't celebrate. She just felt relieved. 1 year later, everything had changed. Marcus was now vice president of technology at Meridian Capital. He didn't expect this. He was hired as chief technology officer. But when the previous CTO decided to retire, Sophie promoted him. His apartment was gone. He and Lily bought a small house in a good neighborhood. 4 bedrooms, a backyard. Lily was in 2nd grade at a private school with an excellent science program. She was thriving. She wanted to be a herpetologist engineer. Marcus's mother called him crying when he told her about his promotion. She said, "I always knew you could do more. I just didn't know how to help you believe it." His sister Natalie called him. Out of nowhere. She said, "I'm in recovery, and I'm sorry. I know it's been 5 years, but I'm sorry." Marcus said, "I forgive you. Come visit when you can." She did. They were rebuilding their relationship. Sophie was CEO of Meridian Capital, but she had fundamentally changed how it operated. She implemented a whistleblower protection program. She created an organization to help people expose corporate fraud. It had helped 47 people. 12 executives had been prosecuted. She and Marcus were dating. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just naturally. They realized at some point that they weren't just grateful, they were in love. It was May. Lily was doing a school play. She was playing a dinosaur. It wasn't good, but it was earnest and joyful. When Lily came out on stage, she looked directly at Marcus and Sophie and grinned. After the play, they went out for ice cream. Lily was still in costume dinosaur head, hanging down her back. She ordered mint chocolate chip. Lily said, "Did I do good?" Marcus said, "You were perfect." Sophie said, "You were magnificent." Lily said, "I knew I was good. I just wanted to make sure you guys knew." Marcus and Sophie exchanged a look. They couldn't help it. They laughed. That night, Marcus thought back to the night Sophie came to his door. He thought about how that one decision to open the door had changed everything. But he also realized it wasn't magic. It wasn't fate. It was just two people choosing to be honest, choosing to help, choosing to believe in each other. The next morning was a Sunday. Lily was asleep between them in bed, the way she did sometimes on Sunday mornings. Marcus was awake, watching Lily sleep. Sophie was awake too, watching them both. Sophie whispered, "Penny, for your thoughts." Marcus said, "I'm thinking about that night, when you were on my porch." Sophie said, "So was I." Marcus said, "I almost didn't open the door." Sophie said, "I know. I could see it. But you did." Marcus said, "Best decision I ever made." Sophie said, "One of them. You also decided to trust me, and that was harder." Marcus said, "Yeah, it was." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Portland was waking up. Coffee shops opening. People starting their Sunday. Lily stirred. She opened her eyes. She saw them both watching her. Lily said, "Why are you guys looking at me like that? Did I do something?" Marcus said, "Baby, we were just thinking about how lucky we are." Lily said, "Lucky? I'm the lucky one. I have 2 parents and a house, and I get to be a herpetologist engineer." Sophie said, "You might need to pick one." Lily said, "My dad said I could be both. He said you can be anything twice." Sophie looked at Marcus. Marcus was smiling. He had said that in a restaurant a long time ago when things were still uncertain. Sophie said, "Your dad is right. Sometimes the most important moments are the ones where you almost say no, but you say yes instead. That's the moment that changes everything." Marcus understood that now. He had opened a door on a rainy night, and that door had opened into a whole different life. Not because he was a hero, not because he was special, but because he was brave enough to be human. He was brave enough to let someone in. He was brave enough to believe that mercy might matter more than safety. And it did. It absolutely did.